fish food. Grace paced through the break room, a small enclosed space which only contained her, a brown armchair that no one ever sat in, and a painting of an angelfish. She clamped her hands over the speakers of her headphones and listened to the smash of the discordant music. "Exterminate the whole human race," she sang along under her breath as she stretched down to meet the floor. Her back still ached from last night's show. Tony entered the room, running into her. The sharp corners of his name tag grazed her arm. He didn't seem to notice. She pulled off the headphones, feeling the absence of the music drop like a dead weight. Tony glanced up at her. "Oh, Grace." He checked his watch, though clearly he didn't need to. "Shouldn't you be suiting up?" She went to the locker room and put on her wetsuit. She watched herself in the mirror as she slipped the black goggles onto her face. Out of everything, the strangest thing about being inside a tank at the aquarium was not the neon colors of fish flitting by, or the sound of nothing but breathing, but the simultaneous feeling of both sinking and floating. In the water, as she inhaled the compressed air, Grace thought of science experiments from grade school. She could remember dropping different materials into cups of water, recording whether they fell to the bottom or bobbed at the surface. And every once in a while, she would find something with the exact same density as water, something that would hover in the exact middle. That was the best way she could describe her job to people, if they asked. The fish were circling around her now, excited by her sudden presence among them. She released dried shrimp and krill from the airtight bag on her belt. The food floated silently around her face. It didn't have the time to sink. The fish swam up so close, Grace could see their fat lips nibbling at it. She closed her eyes. She knew that fish who had never lived in captivity would most likely be frightened by her intrusive presence. But these fish had known nothing else and had accepted her enough. Did they remember her each day, she wondered, the girl at the 1 o'clock feeding? Through the glass, Grace could see the people around the walls. People liked to watch the fish gather to eat. There was something exciting about the fish's endless, blank lives, being interrupted by some form of stimulation. How strange, she'd almost forgotten people were watching them, watching her. She tried to tune everything out to hear their chatter, but there was still no sound. So she tried to recite a song from last night inside her head, but it just didn't play right. She couldn't remember the words. The first row was mostly children, and they were pointing and opening their mouths in an almost exaggerated way. Maybe it only felt like that because everything was muted. Maybe everything silent just has to become exaggerated. That was obvious, she supposed. She almost laughed at herself, but then realized it would make breathing more difficult. She could only ever be in the tank for a few minutes, both because of her small oxygen supply and because of the stillness. She felt trapped in a painting. Everything was so slow. She could remember last night, the noise that had echoed in her chest, the heat that had hung over her head. As soon as she'd arrived, she had moved towards the stage automatically. She had pushed through people and left them behind. She knew she needed noise, needed to spend nights and weekends in these grimy venues where she smashed back and forth in the crowds of people. People just like her, maybe. People who knew nothing much mattered, knew that no one really cared if certain objects sunk or floated in water. The fish always swam away when there was nothing left. They returned to their normal crevices and holes in the coral below. She had done the same, walked home in the dark, smelling like the sweat of other people.